sculpture and Impressionism is kind of strange because you can't really deal with light in sculpture, at least not at this point. So, in Rodin's case, let's start with the most famous one. Instead of how he relates to Impressionism is this idea of loose brushwork. So in Impressionism, you can see the process. You can see how the thing was made. Well, in Rodin, it's the same. You can see how it was made because he doesn't smooth the surface out before it gets cast. He keeps the marks of the carving, the marks of his fingerprints in the piece. So this is his probably most famous piece. It's called The Thinker, and it's cast in bronze. So it's a bronze sculpture. So obviously, when I say it's the evidence of the making, I'm not talking about the evidence of the casting process. I mean, it's the evidence of the thing that he made to make a mold of it. And so we can see in the feet are a bit rough. Feet are a little rough. The texture a little rough. And if we go up here to the top of his head, see how his hair is kind of, you can see how it's just kind of squeezed with the clay is going to squeeze. And did that very quickly. So that's more or less how Rodin fits into Impressionism. Rodin's R-O-D-I-N. The Thinker is this particular sculpture. There's a lot of these floating around with cast sculptures because you're dealing with mold. You can have more than one. So there's actually a miniature one I think here in San Antonio on St. Philip's campus. Although I used to teach there, I don't mind about it, but my students have told me that they've seen it there. So here's another. Let me show you this. Okay, so the figure was originally designed for this sculpture here, which is the Gates of Hell. And so you can see him right there, a small version, and there's a larger version that I showed you. And so he made these bronze gates that are covered in the Gates of Hell, so you have all kinds of horrible things happening on these gates. Really big. It's kind of like a Last Judgment. Okay. Now this is a sculpture. We have a small version of it here at San Antonio at the McNay Art Museum. So you'll see these when you go to McNay, unless they're all around somewhere. So these are the burgers of Calais. These are larger than life size, and the ones we have here in San Antonio are about this big. So sometimes in the casting process, when an artist intends to make a bronze sculpture like this, they'll make a sculpture this big, and they'll make a mold of that, and they can make sculptures directly from their mold, but they take it to an enlarger. And in this case, we can use scanners and computers and all that stuff. But back then, they would take this smaller sculpture to an enlarger, and it was just a craftsperson who would go and kind of with the calipers measure it and then size it up. So someone else would make the larger version that they would make a mold of. It's kind of a strange process, but that would happen. So these are the large versions of the burgers in Calais. An interesting thing about Rodin is he was very influenced. The Impressionists were not influenced by this, but Rodin was. He was really influenced by ancient Greek and Roman sculptures. And he wasn't necessarily interested in the proportions and the idealized bodies. He was interested in the fact that they didn't have heads and they didn't have arms. And so he would make sculptures that didn't have heads or arms on purpose. But of course, those were sculptures that were broken. All right. So that is Impressionism. Impressionism is about capturing the fleeting moment, about revealing the process of the making, and the process of making. By revealing the process of the making, it makes the pieces look like they can change. All right. So that's Impressionism. Now, the period that follows Impressionism is called Post-Impressionism. That makes sense. Post means after. And the Post-Impressionists took Impressionism's lead, and they just went one step further in the abstraction process. So, and in Post-Impressionism, we start to see a wide variety of approaches. Now, it's at this point that the entire system for the entire patronage system and exhibition system that was in place in Paris is really breaking apart. During realism, they had something called the Salon. And the Salon was like the official art gallery. And so if you wanted to make it as an artist, you had to be accepted into the Salon. And so the Salon was populated primarily with Romanticism and with some realism, primarily Romanticism. So you had to become a romantic artist to get into the Salon. So when someone like the Impressionists came along, they were not accepted into the Salon because their work didn't look anything like art was supposed to look. It was too radical. So they began to just show on their own. And they eventually had collectors, patrons who liked what they did and would pay for it. And these were wealthy individuals of all kinds, not even necessarily wealthy individuals. And these individuals were from Paris, or some of the wealthy people from America who were living in Paris at the time, who were buying this stuff, like Gertrude Stein, for instance. So it's at this point, because the Salon's its importance is breaking down, artists are really starting to just do whatever the hell they want to and not worry about conforming to a reigning style. And because of that, we're going to see art change very quickly, very rapidly, because artists then are freed up to do anything they want to do. Okay? And we're going to really see this happen starting now with Post-Impressionism, with a few artists I'm going to show you, because the work does look very different from each other. And it's called Post-Impressionism primarily because it happens just after Impressionism and because it is heavily influenced by what the Impressionists did beforehand. Now, most of the Post-Impressionists knew the Impressionists. They were just a generation apart. Okay? So it was like the older artists and the younger artists kind of a thing. And so these artists knew Monet. They knew, in fact, Monet knew Manet, etc. Okay? So the time periods now are not hundreds of years, it's just decades. Okay? So Post-Impressionism begins, exists at the beginning of the 1800s. Okay? So this is, let's start here. This is a painting by the French artist Cézanne, C-E-Z-A-N-N-E, Cézanne. And he made many, many paintings of a particular mountain near his hometown called Mont Saint-Victoire, or Mount Saint Victory. And so this is one of the many paintings he did. And so Cézanne was very interested in and inspired by Impressionism's loose brushwork. And so he took that on and began to expand on that idea of loose brushwork. And so this is a painting that he did in the early 1800s that looks quite a bit like an Impressionist painting. And a lot of these post-Impressionists kind of began their careers more or less as Impressionists, but they started moving away from that. So we eventually get to something like this. This is another Mont Saint-Victoire by Cézanne, it's a little later. And here, the brushwork is very loose in that you can really see it, but he's approaching how it's applied more differently. You notice that all the brushwork looks kind of angular, like blocks. What? Medium? Oil. I'm sorry. Yeah, if I fail to tell you what the medium of these paintings is, it's oil. That's kind of a given right now. Okay. So any oil, all these paintings I've shown you are oil paintings, every single one. Okay. Thank you. All right. So if you'll notice closely that the painting is painted with brushstrokes that are almost all going like this. And that's because Cézanne started to have these ideas about how the world could be represented. He thought, firstly, that every brushstroke you put down should create a structure. There should be no extraneous marks. So everything creates a structure. He also believed the world could be represented using geometry. Triangles, rectangles, squares, circles, that kind of thing. So he took the scene in front of him and he mentally thought of it, broke it down into these more geometric shapes. And so his paintings began to get really broken up, almost like a tile pattern or quilting. All right? So That's his approach. So he's coming at painting from a different way of thinking now. He's thinking conceptually about how painting could work. And then he's applying those ideas to the painting. So in his still lifes, he would play with space, for instance. He would say, well, it's a painting. I don't have to paint exactly what things look like. I can do what I want to. So I can make the painting work the way I want it to work. So in some of his paintings, you see, like, the space is starting to break a little bit. So like, something will be tilted up, or it couldn't be tilted up in real life. So he's taking liberties. And that's what we see happening in Post-Impressionism, because, for one reason, photography has been invented now. And so, if you want to see something how it appears, just take a picture of it. Artists don't need to do that anymore. They can explore what paint is all about. So we see a real opening up of the way art looks because of that. So photography is now having a huge effect on painting, on art. Okay, so these are both Cézanne. All right, and Cézanne will have a huge effect on the Cubists that we'll look at a little later. So this is the work of another Frenchman. His name is Paul Gauguin, G-A-U-G-U-I-N. And there's a really famous Gauguin here in San Antonio at the Main Galleries that you will see. And I won't tell you anything about it, you can go find it. It's a good one. All right, so here's Gauguin, self-portrait with yellow Christ is what this is called. And so he's painted himself in front of another one of his paintings. And so that yellow Christ painting in the background is an abstract painting of his, of Jesus. Okay, so this is a self-portrait, and this is another one of his paintings, a really interesting one called Day of the Gods, 1894. Day of the Gods. Now, Gauguin's a really interesting character. He was a banker for most of his life. That's where he made his money. And then he decided to leave his family and his children and move to Tahiti. Now, Tahiti was not like a resort town. I mean, this is 1890. So he had to take a long ship ride to Tahiti. Tahiti was really wild. So he went into the wilderness to live amongst the natives. And so he painted a lot of the native people of Tahiti. And this is one of those, Day of the Gods. And as you can see, he's taking quite a bit of liberties now when he's painting. He's simplified the painting quite a bit. There's not a whole lot of shading going on in the figures. And if we look in large areas of color being placed down, not a lot of modulation, which we've seen in previous periods. And then at the bottom of this painting, we see the water. And the water is turned into this totally non-objective section of the painting. There's nothing reflected in this water. It's just crazy. Painting is just color. So he's really starting to explore. We have 2 minutes. He's really starting to explore the power of color and shape and those kinds of ideas, formal ideas, not just relying on what he sees. We'll stop there. And so next time we will finish up with Post-Impressionism and then look at 3 styles that came directly out of